I'd like to pass things along to the person who's been behind the scenes all week, Steve Nathan Skelly. He's the editor of Streaming Media Producer, and he'll be moderating today's panel. So take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Eric. And again, thanks to Verimatrix for sponsoring this session, and thanks to all our panelists for being here. It's great to have you, and it's great to have all the attendees. Welcome to live streaming in a changing world. You know, as all of you know, COVID-19 has changed a lot of things about the way that we live, the ways we work, the way we learn, interact, consume entertainment, and the way we stream. And while in many respects, streaming is surging right now, and social distancing has made streaming indispensable for business communications, education, worship, large-scale in-person events that have largely defined our industry are also largely on hold or substantially changed. And so this, you know, this has affected producers in a number of ways, and streamers in a number of ways. You know, at first, a lot of our work just dried up. And then over time, we've adapted to remote and distance production. We've worked with essential clients and found ways to do this. This is, in some ways, this has meant new workflows, working with different kinds of gear, different approaches of pre-production, different ways of working with our teams and our talent. And then there's those of us who have been doing virtual events for years who are now obviously in high demand. So anyway, we've got a great panel. We've got a wealth of expertise on streaming production, streaming delivery, streaming security. And rather than just me trying to read off their bios now, I'll let them introduce themselves. Liz, why don't you start us off?
Hi, I'm Liz Hart. I'm a producer and an associate director. I've been a producer for New Year's Eve Ball Drop with LiveX for 6 years, and I just rolled off a mixed reality event for the Tokyo Olympics that is now hopefully going to be for next year. I'm also involved in Democratic politics. I'm a former White House director to Joe Biden, where I worked at the intersection of messaging and politics. As you may have heard, it's an election year, so we might talk a little bit about that and how it relates to the new wave of live streaming. And between that, I've been assembling and shipping remote kits out of my house, which I'm sure many of you may be familiar with now also. But thank you to Streaming Media East for having me back this year.
Ben, go next.
Hey everyone, I am Ben Ratner. I'm currently technical director at Maven, where I do a lot of breaking news video for Sports Illustrated and Jim Cramer's The Street. Before that, I worked with Neil deGrasse Tyson for 5 years on his podcast Star Talk, doing all of his tech and video and live streaming. Did a little bit of work with Al Roker for about a year, running live streaming for his company, Roker Media. And before that, I worked for Anthony Cumia from Opie and Anthony on his streaming podcast network, Compound Media. Live streaming is fun. That's all I have to say.
Asaf?
Sure. Thank you very much. So my name is Asaf Ashkenazi. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Verimatrix. And just not to introduce only myself, Verimatrix, because we are a little bit different here in the landscape, we are doing cybersecurity and anti-piracy solutions. They have about 1,000 customers around the world. We're protecting streaming and the biggest video distributors, as well as many banks that we provide our solutions, banks and financial institutes that we provide a solution for them. I've been working on cybersecurity, or how it was called security before it became like fancy cybersecurity, for almost, I think, 20 years. That's for me.
Cory?
Hi, thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me. My name is Cory Smith. I'm Director of Live Operations for Activision Blizzard Esports. My team is responsible for all of the television production platform for all of our Call of Duty, Overwatch League, and other Blizzard Esports, Hearthstone, and World of Warcraft, etc.
Alex?
Hi, I started doing this because I was trying to train a bunch of people on how to do visual effects. I came out of ILM and said, I'm going to teach everybody how to do this, and cobbled it together in the early 2000s. 2,000 people in 40 countries was difficult. We slowly picked up and started doing work for Google and Facebook. We were kind of the white glove / moonshot company for Hangouts for almost a decade ago, which is kind of the modern precursor to virtual events. And so we got a lot of time, a couple thousand events to think about, how to get people to interact and how to build virtual teams to put that together. I currently work at 090 Media, and what we do is manage everything from straight live events to virtual events.
Great, thanks. So just start right in with some questions here. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, one of the biggest challenges for producers over the last few months has been moving to different workflows. And, one in particular, I think as Liz alluded to, is building shows around remote talent that are sheltering at home and somehow making those shooting conditions viable when really we don't have the same control we usually do. So Liz, why don't you start off this one just talking about how has your workflow and your production roles, how have those changed?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, it's obviously an incredibly difficult time right now, but live streamers being the innovators and the problem solvers that we are, if there was ever an industry to solve it, I think it is this one. It's an interesting time for us because we've gone from being a secondary thought to a primary thought for clients who wouldn't necessarily have viewed us in this way. It's reaching out and consulting with live stream teams and partners earlier than we've ever been before to ask, what are the tools that can drive this programming, opposed to can we turn what might have been a live event in and of its own standing into something that's additionally live streamed. So being able to have that seat at the table, I think, is changing the workflow in that we're starting conversations earlier. We're also raising different formats and also different ways to use tools earlier, and thus ways to budget differently. There's also, as you mentioned, Steve, an education component that we're seeing falling to live stream teams. Clients are asking us to distill what the options are now, and because it's so much more than wanting just another Zoom, we're being tasked with explaining different formats. We've maybe seen anywhere between 10 and 20 different types of shows that can happen, whether it's hub and spoke or it's a more editorial type of conglomeration of packages. All of these different options are now falling to our sales teams and our business development teams to help clients understand this as well, and then logistically plan for those things. So I'm personally seeing it in planning in advance, and then also in a more granular way, working with talent and at-home remote contributors who then we are looking to us to walk them through specifically what it's going to take for them to have, to provide a good feed, to set up a good shot, and planning for the time that takes as well, in addition to translating for new audiences and how they can participate, is changing all of our scheduling and all of our staffing and resources and all of our budgets.
I think that one of the things that we think about a lot, we've prepped probably in the last decade, probably 4,000 or 5,000 people for remote events. And for us, we kind of break people into 4 groups as far as remote participants. We have a team, so a really high profile event means we drop a team on the ground to manage every location. That is not practical at the moment, but that is one. Then we have remote broadcast, which is a broadcast level camera, completely IP controlled, so that we're able to literally shade the camera remotely, handle the mics, everything else. We drop the kit, it builds up, and we control it from master control. And then we have kit, which is a web kit, usually about a $500 to $700 kit that is a good webcam, lights, mic, earpiece, to tighten everybody up. And then we do best effort. Best effort is just what can we do with what they have there. And I think that we're dealing with right now all of those things, like where we're, best effort has become really popular because you can't buy the webcams that we would typically use. All the Logitech stuff is sold out. So the webcams and the microphones that we learned to lean on heavily for these remote events are not available. So we're getting pretty scrappy about, how we put those together. But as Liz alluded to, a lot of us are getting brought in a lot earlier. One of the big things, the most important things for a lot of these events, because there's so many multiple points, is being able to have enough lead time to, you don't want to call everybody and prep them the day before the event, because we need to know what kind of internet they have, where they're going to sit, how they're going to do those things. So we're trying to get a hold of them, 10 days, 15 days ahead of time, so that if there's something that needs to be done, we have time to actually execute that.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that we have kind of been going through, we don't have kind of the same pop-up events of different things happening. We have basically, since we're an esports league, we kind of know where our casters are going to be. We kind of know where our replay folks are going to be. We kind of know where our graphics guys are at, and they're all in their homes. So as part of the journey to kind of this online kind of production, Alex is right. You don't know what the home internet upload speeds are going to be, and it varies depending on where at in the world you are, and it varies based on what city you're in. So there's a lot of complications that we had to figure out in going to kind of a full online model that we didn't really have to deal with before, because you go into a venue, there's at least fiber there. You can pull up a SAT truck if you need to. There's a flyaway kit of some kind there that you can bring into the venue. But in this particular world, you're dealing with, webcams from Logitech and, PCs that you would normally play video games on. Now they're your primary contribution source for your online event and tournament stuff. So there was a lot of things that we learned going through the process of going online that we didn't really think about all the way through until we actually had to do it. So there was a lot of planning, a lot of execution, a lot of scramble around. There's a lot of long hours, but we eventually got there and got on the air. So.
Ben, you look like you're about to say something. Are you?
Believe it or not, I was not. Okay,
well, yeah, and actually, I think Cory brings up a really interesting topic that he'd actually suggested to me before this. This is, I think that with the move online with events, in one sense, at least, it's been sort of good news for stream, because it's, we're the only game in town, right, when we can't have in-person events. But that the good news, bad news thing, certainly with the esports boom, the so-called esports boom now, is that we don't have, the huge in-person live events that were really growing in the esports world. So, I think this is really a question for everyone. What have been the sort of best, worst, and most surprising parts of the changes we've experienced over the last few months? Ben, you want to just kick us off there?
I think I don't know if it's a surprise per se, but I think it's, again, dealing with people's home internet. In almost every scenario, we're able to get, as everyone's saying, you get a webcam, even if you get an upgraded version of it because the original webcam isn't available. Almost everyone has AirPods now. Everyone has a lamp. I'm literally just using a desk lamp here to light me up here. Almost every element of a broadcast exists for everyone, but that internet has been, even the people that you think are super rich and have the nicest house still have like 0.1 megabit upload speeds. So that's definitely been the biggest surprise for me, and challenge has been how to get around that for a lot of people. And in some cases, for our frequent hosts, frequent guests, we've worked with them to, upgrade their internet speed. They didn't realize that they could just spend an extra 20, 30 bucks a month and upgrade from, a 1 megabit upload to a 10 megabit upload speed. Also, with some of the kind of top tier hosts that we work with, we use something like QuickLink, which is a TV studio in a box. It has a PTZ, it goes to Skype, it goes to Microsoft Teams TX to get just full control. And also, things like LiveView, bringing in an RTMP source over bonded cellular into almost any production suite has been a godsend for people that we just couldn't normally rely on.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of the events that we're working on actually have a much higher participation rate. So one of the things that as people are starting to work on these events, they're suddenly realizing how many people. We had a client almost initially when they first did their first event, what they expected to be 80 people turned out to be 250. I have someone else that we work with that they expected 200 and they ended up with 1,100. And what we realized is how many people weren't coming because they didn't want to displace 4 days for a 2-day event. They didn't want to pay for the hotel. They didn't want to pay for the flight. So what we're seeing is huge participation numbers compared to what we saw with physical events. And so that is not what we expected right out of the gate, was that many more people were going to start showing up. And so especially as people plan something inside of Zoom, for instance, they end up needing a lot more than they need. For streaming, we just kind of stream it to whatever CDN we're solving it with, and that number isn't, but it's starting to change the way people think about these conferences. For folks who are charging for it, some of them are still seeing increased attendance even through a charged event. People who are not charging who are doing this for PR are seeing at least our partners are seeing huge increases in the number of people attending and interacting. And a lot of them they're not quite there yet, but if this year continues to go the direction that they're going, a lot of them are talking about greatly reducing the number of events that they're doing in person. You're not necessarily getting rid of all of them. There's some really high value ones that you're spending a lot of money per person on that they want to keep. But the ones that were more general admission, that were having 5,000 people show up, a lot of those aren't starting to pencil out anymore. And so, as they start to realize this was not nearly as bad or as hard as as we thought. And the other thing is that the online audience now is the primary audience. We're talking to people. When we do this roundtable right now, if we stream this, we'd all be talking on a stage, and you'd be a fly on the wall somewhere in the back of the room. And the questions would mostly come from the room, and you wouldn't really be part of it. Now, the online audience has this much more visceral connection, and we see it really having a huge effect on how many people come, how interactive they are, and how connected they feel to the event.
I'd agree. A lot of the things we're noticing is that we're getting a little bit more intimate with our community of fans, where typically when we were doing our home and away model before going online, that the primary kind of viewing audience was who was attending the event, right? It was a sporting event, right? So you had people come in, buy merchandise and beverages and concessions and enjoy the match. And then the online piece was kind of the piece for the folks that couldn't attend. But one of the challenging things, for us that was surprising was the internet uplink connectivity piece. The surprising thing for us was how fast we were able to adopt our production crew that was normally used to working in a typical OB truck to actually manage online software for switching living room. The agility that the folks made kind of almost overnight were able to really kind of pivot their understanding from having a physical control surface in front of them to clicking mouses and buttons and boxes on a virtual interface.
So I have an aspect that is different. It's more the negative stuff that we see that we were surprised. The amount of fraud and attacks is grew. We knew that it will grow, but it was we never saw something like that. And I think that it is because there are a lot of people that unfortunately are in not so good because of the economic turmoil, and they need the money. If they have some skills, they move to do something bad or to try to monetize and get make a living in the virtual world. The move to criminal activity is much easier than in the physical world. And I think that the thing that is very interesting is we saw a lot of shifts to have kind of opportunistics of attacks on a smaller targets. So if you look at the past, it's more like the big and how can we make more organized and groups, and how can we make more money. And we start to see this a lot of this COVID fraud, where they even target smaller streamings and smaller revenue from their perspective. So for example, one of the things that we see a lot is that they're saying now it's free, or now for if it's subscription, then they make it free and they make out of the commercials, or they hijack or repackage applications of different streaming and they inject their own ads. So they basically steal the revenue that is coming from advertising. And because they find these soft targets that it's easier to do, the amount of investment for doing it is not so high for them, which means that they can go after targets that are smaller. So organizations and services that in the past thought that they are below the radar, that nobody will go after them because they are too small, we see now that they have problems if they don't provide some barrier that will make it difficult for hackers to go and attack them.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah, so sorry, did anybody have anything they wanted to add on that? Okay, great. So yeah, so thanks Asaf. You know, it's really a different perspective and something, you know, that we got to be aware of for sure. Last week we actually we had a little rehearsal for this, and even though I think this is a group that I don't need to tell much about being ready for a remote event, but we did, a couple of us did get together, and Ben, you mentioned something that was really interesting that I wanted to ask you about today. You know, you said that with some of the clients that you've been working with, you know, maybe for the first time in remote production, one part of the conversation that was maybe surprising was finding yourself in the position of encouraging them not to stream, actually to do this differently in a way that is probably going to be more successful for them. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how, you know, what brings you to make that recommendation?
Yep. As I said earlier, one of the biggest problems is internet upload speed. And again, every other part of this can be controlled: camera, lights, audio, all good, but you can't always control the internet. If there is not an interactive element or a timely element to your stream, I think it's important to at least consider not doing it live. A lot of times people on company will say, oh, we should do this live. Everyone's doing it live. We should definitely do a Zoom. We should definitely do this. But what I've found is that a good portion of the time, you just don't need to do that. It takes a lot of stress off of a production. It takes a lot of, if something has to go perfectly, there is a non-zero chance that you'll have a problem live. Facebook does premieres, YouTube does premieres, which are basically streaming in real time to people, but something that you pre-recorded or edited earlier. Take something like a school graduation. You're giving speeches. You're not necessarily responding to the crowd that isn't cheering in front of you. Things that, thousands and thousands of people are going to be watching. If you need it to be perfect and it doesn't need to be live, it's worth considering. And believe me, I've lost business by telling people don't stream it live. You don't necessarily need my services. But it's a lot easier and more cost effective depending on the production to just, even if you're in iMovie, just have everyone record on their phone and pop it into iMovie if you need to do it cheaper or have another level of reliability. So I guess what's important is just figure out the needs of your clients. And sometimes they don't realize that their desires are probably not necessarily in the right place. So it's just good to have that conversation and potentially shift them in a different direction.
I think that I completely agree with Ben that we basically when we talk to clients, we basically say that if you don't have sports, breaking news, or interactivity, you probably ought not stream. You're adding a huge level of liability for no return. For that. Now, the caveat to that is that we find that if you don't have interaction in 3 to 5 minutes, the view time starts to drop like a rock. So if you, I think esports is sometimes a little bit of or sports in general can be a little less of that because there's something happening and a lot of people are interacting with each other. There's something really breaking and unpredictable in the sports realm and in the esports realm. But for most of our clients, what we would say is that you have 3 to 5 minutes to start engaging the audience before you start losing them. People want to do a 45-minute presentation unless it's really good, and I'm talking $75,000 to $100,000 a minute. You're not going to keep them. You're going to start seeing a fade pretty quickly. Through that thing. You have to have really good talent, really good on-air talent, really good production values to hang on to people for very long without some kind of interaction or some place for them to do that. So. Some of our clients aren't ready for that. So they're not ready to have that level of interaction. But when we talk to clients, I think the participatory video is the future. you know, and I think that people want to be part of the conversation, and when we don't find ways for them to be part of the conversation, you know, it's just not effective. And as more people get good at that, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to do just a straight play out and have any kind of meaningful viewership.
Yeah, you know, doing the online thing, we have an option. We could do the event. We can then go and post whatever we need for that package, and then prop it up to YouTube as an example and do a live divad play out kind of scenario. And we've toyed around about, you know, what's the production look like from a value proposition, but it really goes back to the number of viewers. And if the content doesn't feel fresh and doesn't feel new, it doesn't have that live kind of polish to it, then the audience won't tune in. We found with a lot of the, you know, the attention span of all of the stuff going on for online media right now is that you really have to kind of hone your content for your target audience. So we're very craftful in how we kind of approach different segments we use during our course of our esports events, what our VOD content library looks like that we post-produce, the small form segment shows that we put on the air. But from the point of view of moving our stuff online, we weren't just happy with like a 4-box of a couple players and, you know, gameplay. We had to take our entire venue production and move it basically online, which meant all of the caster cameras, all of the replay cameras, all of the what we call observers, which are the virtual cameras that fly through the map, kind of following the action, all of our graphics packages, all of our regional distribution and our localization. We basically took everything we did at the venue and we moved it into cloud, which was huge because a lot of the issues we also had to deal with is what type of platforms are out there and available for us to actually do that show on and do it effectively. You know, it was a lot of trial and error at first when we first got it, but I think we've got our feet underneath us right now. But the evolving world is, you know, we're not going to go back to the original, you know, venue production model. I think we're going to always maintain this kind of, you know, hybrid approach. And it's one, not to spend a bunch of money you don't have to, but it's also being smarter about how it is that you're producing television content. And so from that standpoint, you know, I think we've been pretty successful this last, you know, several months in moving to our online world, so to speak.
Well, you know, I think one of the challenges going forward is really anticipate. I mean, I think you know, obviously it's been very important, you know, as Cory said, to adapt and to adapt the ways that you work and the ways that you produce and do something that's going to be viable for as long as we're in this situation, and maybe anticipating the possibility that the new normal is nothing like the old normal. You know, but also anticipating the chance that some form of in-person events might return, you know, sooner than we think, or certainly within the time frame that we're planning events. You know, how do you deal in that, keeping in mind that long time frame? How do you deal with the contingencies of really not knowing where events are going to be when your event is scheduled to happen? Liz, go on.
So from a large scale perspective, let's talk about the Olympics for a second. So we're on a delay with the rest of the world, as do all of the storylines and all of the creative that comes with sponsorship campaigns, partnerships, and where live stream might come in to tell one of those stories. So not only are our clients trying to figure out what they're going to do, our flexibility to use content and even change content once we do go over there in an ever-changing world, where even current events might change, where a particular advertising campaign, if those are our clients, being able to offer multiple solutions, of being able to pivot either the same content or the same resources as they also go through their changes, is what I'm seeing is going to make the partnerships between what might have been just, we're here to technically capture what you have, long-standing partnerships in a world where every single vendor, every single aspect that's involved in a campaign is not necessarily airtight or guaranteed anymore. So that kind of flexibility, and also coming from the jump with here's how we can be flexible instead of waiting for that ask to come, is where we're focusing on being valuable partners and also keeping ourselves in the game when unpredictability and unpredictable budgets come with that. But additionally, we're looking at planning for a time when we don't know what the state of public health will be, what local and really local, state, and federal and all levels of government guidance may be. And to that end, we're talking about, let's say, like 3 plans at once, and those needing to be fired simultaneously as we build these planes while we fly them. So it's simultaneously planning for as if we find a vaccine tomorrow and everything is going forward as we dreamed and might have had a 2019 version, to also if no one can physically come, and something hybrid in the middle. So what they're asking of producers and what they're asking of vendors and partners like us is to make those 3 plans actionable every single day from the moment that we're hired. And then as we get closer day by day, we're shifting with our clients towards which one is actually going to happen when that calendar date comes. So the challenges that we're trying to navigate now are, how do we do that? How do we reserve staff? How do we encourage our clients to pull those triggers and say yes or no to certain decisions that need to be made and for a show to physically even happen? And also being sensitive to the fact that there is not unlimited funds for many of these people. So identifying very specifically what those phases are of decision making, knowing that we're going to say yes until we have to say no is the new standard, is how we've gone about approaching it on all sizes of events, as large as, let's say, the Olympics and a convention, and as small as a small business who wants to do a fundraiser and is now switching to, like a gala or an organization or an NGO that's doing a fundraiser that now needs to still make money in the same way. The sensitivities are the same for all.
And I think that one of the things for our clients, I mean, and I have to admit, because I think we have relatively good fast twitch muscles, most of our events are booked less than 12 weeks out, for better or for worse. And so, you know, like we can build a lot of events in 12 weeks because that's what we've done for the last decade. So, and oftentimes it's much less than that. I think for a long stretch, our average was 2 or 3 weeks out to build up something, oftentimes globally. So I think that for us, a lot of our corporate clients are really we're not going to do anything until next June, like, you know, until a year from now. You know, they're just saying we need to plan and we need to not think about this anymore. So what we're going to do is, the new reality for them is to plan to go through May of next year, assuming that they're just going to do all virtual and not have more than 50 people in the same room. And it just lets them kind of solidify that, and so that they can start making choices. I think for a lot of clients, the plan that they have is better than any other plan. You know, like if you just create a plan, you know, like the earlier you can decide this is where we're going to go, rather than zigzagging for most events. It's better just to take a path. And so, you know, I do think that some of our political partners are still trying to figure out what's going to happen in the fall, you know, and how far they can take that, you know, that process. But I think that for a lot of our corporate clients, they've just written off the next year, you know, and to focus on it. And then lots of smaller companies usually are living in a much tighter turn, so they don't have to think about next year yet. But most of them, obviously, the summer and probably the fall, they're planning to just do virtual, and then they're hoping that something's going to come out. But the reality is, we're not going to have a vaccine until January. It's not going to be distributed for take 3 to 6 months for propagation, and then you have to deal with, you know, a large number of people that will not take it immediately. And so you know, I think that we're going to probably have, you know, middle of next year is probably about as optimistic as we expect to see for any kind of event more than 100 people.
I come from the prosumer world, where for 4 or 5 years now, I've been the only person on a production many times. I think that kind of work, not for every occasion, but for many occasions, is going to come in use now. Someone who's not only able to do the basic tech, audio, video, have a camera, know the basics of using bonded cellular or getting connected to the internet, but also someone who's able to do all-in-one production with something like TriCaster or any of OBS, Wirecast, any of the kind of prosumer mid-level ways to do live multi-camera production. I think that's a good kind of person to know or be able to hire, because, you know, if you're not allowed to have 50 people in a room, you can only have, let's say, 25 people. They're not going to waste 10 of those people on a live streaming crew. They're going to, you know, clients are going to want, you know, one person in there that could just do everything, or someone that could handle all the different elements and, you know, send all your signals to somewhere else. So I think if it's possible to find, you know, all-in-one kind of tech producers or just all-in-one producers in general, that's a useful thing until we know more about what's going on. Although obviously, if you have the opportunity to hire and bring in bigger teams, it will be better, it will be nicer. But sometimes you have to deal with the reality of amount of people you could fit in the room.
Well, and what's amazing is the technology's never been better for us to do that kind of thing. I mean, if you
what
look at
a great time for a pandemic, right?
I mean, well, I think that the reason that things are going to change so dramatically is because the technology was here to do it. Zoom was here to do it. I mean, right now we can throw an A10 Mini with three 6K cameras, you know, and a little mixer into a 1510 and a backpack, send a person out, and they can cut a 3-camera. Yeah, we all are playing with them, you know, and so you can, you know, and you can cut a very basic show, you know, with that. Is that going to replace, you know, all the stuff that we have? No, but you can do a relatively good show, especially as a contribution into a larger show. So a lot of what we look at, and one of the reasons I started doing this morning thing called Office Hours that has, you know, we have 300 people showing up from around the world every day, and all we're doing is talking about production, because I need to make sure that I have exactly what you're looking for, Ben, which is I need to make sure that I know who those people are anywhere in the world, because we're going to need them, you know, as this continues to move forward. And so how do we educate them? How do we have them educate each other? It's really more peer-to-peer than it is, you know, a class. And so, but a lot of that is paying attention to. You're absolutely right that this all-in-one, and the hardest thing, by the way, is audio. You know, video is relatively straightforward. It's people who understand audio and comms are gold. So, you know, like on that, in that Predator side, I don't know. I mean, that's been our experience. Audio is much harder to teach than video from a live perspective, because you can't see it, you know, but audio is probably more important than video, because you can't watch bad audio. You can't listen to bad audio for very long. You can watch bad video for quite some time.
Yeah, I would disagree that you can watch video with bad audio, because in
no, I'm saying you can't watch, if it's got bad audio, you can't last very long without it.
Sorry.
The video can break up and do all kinds of funny things, but if the audio starts breaking up, people are like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, it totally destroys the entire experience. And so like from our esports programming scenario, like on a typical weekend when we have 4 shows running, we're producing over 55 hours of live content over the course of 3 days. So the only way we were able to do that is to move our complete production workload online. Meant that we weren't backhauling signal pass to people's houses. All contribution from folks' homes were either through Zixi Pass, direct RTMP, and now we're even, you know, kind of moving down the SRT route to kind of do more low latency contribution. And so our kind of saving grace is, you know, we were kind of doing a lot of work with some of the kind of online technology partners early on to develop kind of a master control solution that and we've announced with SVG and whatnot. We've been working with Grass Valley over the last year and a half to develop kind of an online cloud strategy there. So when we took master control, we said, okay, well, that it works well for master control. Now we're going to go online. How do we expand its capabilities to do full REMI cloud production, where my TD, my graphics op, they can be in different parts of the country, and they're just basically plugging into a cloud interface. There's no backhaul to people's homes or anything like that. So our model for IP has really been a focus on cloud and getting stuff out of people's homes and out of backhaul to specific locations. And so that is, to us, the kind of REMI moving forward hybrid model that I think is going to continue to be kind of the model of how even live event at venues, you know, take place in the future. To Alex's point, you can send a guy out in the field with a couple cameras, get him set up, backhaul those ISOs and cut the show remotely. So I think it's going to be a very interesting world from a technology perspective on how much investment we actually continue to make in CapEx at specific venues for shows and tours that run around the country or the world.
You know, we just got a really interesting question from the audience that just like to get somebody's take on. So this attendee asks, in light of recent events in the U.S., e.g. protests and the live streaming by journalists, are there new technical requirements coming from broadcasters?
I think there's the technical requirements are, can you get the signal back to us? I think that broadcasters are trying to just keep up with everything, you know, whether it's their cell phone or whether it's a live view or whether it's a, you know, all these things. The broadcasters at this point are just trying to hang on. You know, they're just trying to, you know, grab the content as it's being generated. At least the partners that we've worked with, you know, they're I don't know if there used to be a lot of rules about, you know, what was legal video and what wasn't, and all the checks and balances, and a lot of that just for the immediacy. The problem that broadcasters have in general is they're competing with, you know, the web, you know, or they're competing with, you know, network, you know, the online network that stuff is on Twitter, on Facebook immediately, you know, oftentimes in real time. And so that's just changed the entire, you know, calculus for a lot of these broadcasters as far as, you know, what they can wait for and what they can wait to check. And I think there's a lot of pluses and minuses to that as far as, you know, what that content actually means now, given that there's not really any thought process to it before it hits the screen. But it also means that it's really hard to censor it because it's out there and it's hard to miss. And I think what we're also seeing is a similar kind of feedback loop that we saw at Arab Spring, where when people see other people doing the same thing, they feel emboldened and ready to do, you know, kind of follow along. And so it kind of creates a self-building chain reaction. And I think that the primary source of that actually in Arab Spring was the actually Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera was coming to everybody's satellite dishes and really showing them what was happening. We talk about Twitter, but it was the Al Jazeera feedback loop was pretty strong in most of those countries. And so I think that it's important that citizens have the ability to now, you know, project, you know, all of that and have it be uncensored and out in front of folks. So it's a really interesting time from a media perspective, to watch what's happening.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like the race to get content on the air hasn't been greater because everybody basically has a small television production system on their iPhones or their Android devices, or, you know, whether mobile phones you have. And so now you're competing against the kind of the micro broadcasters that are covering some of the unrest that's going on in the country right now, just because they happen to be sitting on the street and they have a cellular signal out to Twitter or Facebook or wherever it happens to be. But the mainstream kind of news journalism has to be just as competitive in terms of getting that content to air, because otherwise the eyeballs are going to start shifting around, and now you have a completely different, you know, kind of interesting time to keep those eyeballs to your content that you're producing, that you're spending money on making, as opposed to kind of the micro broadcasters that are on Facebook. So.
Yeah, we actually got a question very much on that theme from Anil, who I just want to give a shout out to Anil, because I'm pretty sure he's been in every webinar we've done this week and asked questions and all of it. He's been a great participant this week. But yeah, he raises that same point, that with not so much in reference to political events and so forth, but with everybody getting into streaming, from micro producers to your aunt and uncle. It's harder to cut through the clutter. So, you know, he just asked if you have any recommendations on how to stand out. Is it marketing? Is it social media, partnerships? How do you distinguish yourself from the crowd?
I mean, I think one of the things that we focus a lot on with our clients is building community. A lot of people will say content is king, and we'll argue that community is king and content is a honeypot. You know, content is what brings people in, and what you have to figure out is how to convert those folks that came in for the content into an ongoing relationship with the brand or with or individual or with your content. You know, but you have to figure out how do you, build that connection over time, as opposed to a singular event that just happens and because as you build that community keeps on coming back. That community keeps on sharing what you're doing. That community keeps that core, and it doesn't have to be, it might be 10% of the viewership, but it's the viewership that's bringing a lot of that in and generating a lot of the interactivity and generating a lot of the excitement. So figuring out a way to convert content into community, I think is probably going to become one of the most valuable mechanisms that we use over the next decade.
I'd almost say, like, and there was somebody in the webinar chat that actually posted, hey, the Dropkick Murphys show. And obviously I'm a fan of Dropkick Murphys. I watched the show, but it did lack kind of this interactive kind of element where we were just kind of watching a band at Fenway, and we were missing some element there. So
it's like a 2-hour sound check.
Yeah, but it was fun. It was fun to watch, but you didn't really feel like that you were there, and you kind of felt like the bands were going through the kind of the motions of what they would normally do on stage in front of a live audience, and it kind of didn't really feel the same. So I think from a compelling content standpoint, we have to, as television producers, figure out how to bridge that kind of the divide between making it look like it's real and bringing the audience into, or the community that wants to watch that content into kind of the broadcast in some particular way.
Let's see. So just going back and forth between my questions and the audience questions here. So one thing I did want to make sure we asked about, just because Liz mentioned this in her intro, and I think it is something a lot of people want to know about. What can you tell us about the? I know there's a lot you can't tell us, but what can you tell us about the Democratic Convention at this point and what we can expect?
Well, yes, it is, of course, still happening, which I think is the most important thing. Cancellation is not on the horizon. It has been postponed until mid-August. That's about 1 month later than it was originally planned, and it will still be in Milwaukee. That said, it will be different it'll be different this year than any other year. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, first and foremost, what's driving that is public health being the #1 priority. But that also, like we mentioned before, means contingencies. So just like we had to for the Olympics, we are going fully into scenario planning, and time passing will determine which of those scenarios is the right one. But I think it's important to note that the DNC voted to just in-person convention requirements this year, which is pretty unprecedented. It gives the latitude to use innovative solutions in a way that more traditional forms would have usurped in the past. And innovative solutions certainly include live streaming. But overall, I do think it's important to remember that modernization is par for the course for quadrennial events like this one. We were modernizing each 4 years to keep up with digital trends anyways. Last time in 2016, we built to include YouTube creators. Alex was there, and give them tools that they would need, because we were seeing that that is where voters were consuming content. And had we not given them a platform, that would have been an incredible miss. And we began streaming to Roku, things like in the Obama administration, I remember taking the first official selfie because Instagram platform was a thing, and now we have stories and IGTV. So modernization for every 4 years makes sense, and this is par for the course. And I think that personally, I think a party that prioritizes being innovative and calls it like it is early is a path to a successful convention or large-scale event or campaign that can exist through this. We'll start with that.
I think we'll see a lot of innovation this year. Mm-hmm. I think that it's just, it's so important, more than anything else, is to keep voters excited and engaged, and that's going to be the challenge, because you're not going to be on tour. You're not going to be, there's not going to be the same physical experience, but figuring out ways to, again, generate that community, ways to connect them, ways to get them excited, ways to educate them, to make sure that no matter what side they're on, they really understand the issues that they're dealing with, and they really understand what's at stake, on either side. And so I think that it's probably the most important election in our lifetimes. And so it'll be really interesting to see how much I think that there'll be a lot of investment. so it'll be pretty exciting fall is my guess.
It's also an exciting time for concentration and for eyeballs, going back to what we were talking about before, in ways that we're seeing viewership and attention in a way that we haven't necessarily seen before. So being able to harness that, I think, is very exciting for us. It's an opportunity in what could be seen as a dark time. It does exactly what Alex said, though. The other entities, sports leagues, movie premieres, etc., are trying to solve the, Alex is saying community. I've also heard the phrase fandom. What is it specifically that's going to close that gap between being able to go somewhere in person and still feel connected and also feel mobilized? And whoever can, it's almost like a virtual space race, whoever can get to that first, whoever solves that first, is on a very lucrative path.
I think just one thing to add here, it's because it reminds me the problem with the voting that there was in the applications. So if you look at the sense of community and what's that you all mentioned, it's very interesting because it's not just passively watching video, it's the interaction, and a lot of that goes to the ability that the application on the mobile device or the technology that run on the browser that allows you to do more. Because today, even on the browser, you run kind of an application is becoming more and more important. And the interaction with the user, keeping their also privacy when with credentials and everything that we handle for these customers is extremely important, because the damage there of losing the trust of your customers can be devastating to the business.
Well, the other devastating thing that could be to your business as well is if you don't treat online production the same you would in studio production, whereas the quality bar is lower because people think, oh, it's online, it can be lower. When we get back to our studio production, we can up the quality and that kind of thing. I think that we're now in a position where there's so much online in terms of live production that if we don't pay attention to the quality bar in which we produce our shows, the actual stream integrity itself, the quality of the visual representation of the television signal path, that the audiences are going to move away from your content, and you're going to lose both revenue from monetization because you don't have the ad impressions, or you just don't have the viewership at all, and your sponsors kind of drop out of your programming schedule. So, we're very sensitive to our stream quality because we feel our community and our fans deserve it. Just because we're online doesn't mean we need to, treat our show any differently than when we were in a studio production.
One of my big pet peeves.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think one of my big pet peeves with a lot of production right now is we're 3 months into this now, and a lot of people are still just doing video in their living rooms. Obviously, this is different. We're doing a panel right now. But for TV shows, like, real live streams, real high produced things that normally have a host in a studio and everything, at this point, I feel like there is no excuse not to either have a TV or a green screen behind every person. Make it look like you're either on the set or something similar to the set. The whole, hey, we're in a living room and there's bookshelves, yay, that was cute for, I'm going to say, a month of the 3 months of this so far. Make your stuff look real. A TV, a 65-inch TV costs less than $500. Just throw a USB picture into the back of that, or a green screen. I mean, you could even do green screen on a MacBook Pro. You could do it in the cloud. These things cost nothing to do. If you start making your content look like regular content, that to me is going to be a much longer term happy thing for your audience to see. And there's enough crap going on in the world right now. If they could just be comforted and not think about, oh, what's that stupid family picture doing in the background, I think you'll have a lot happier of an audience.
Well, and I think that we were all given, everyone got a little bit of a mulligan, for the first couple months as people started to figure it out. But and people have benefited from the fact of constrained supply of webcams and good mics and web presenters and all the things that we need to really up the game over in the short period of time. But as all that stuff starts to fill in, I think by the end of the summer, both online and in broadcast, you're going to see a pretty high quality. And when you look at not only the number of viewers, but how your brand appears to, or your partner's brands appear to the world, it's going to have to be a pretty high quality, or, you know, it's going to go back to that relatively. When we saw YouTube start, it was pretty low quality. When we saw TikTok start, it was pretty low quality, but all of those things keep on ramping up, you know, and the game gets harder and harder and harder, like Bitcoin. You know, it's easy to make Bitcoins at the beginning, and then after a while it starts to get harder. And in the same way, our content gets harder and harder and harder because people are adapting. They're getting better at what they do. And I see the quality increasing for live streams, for post, everything, every day. That you're seeing better streams, better audio, better lighting, better video, better roll-ins. All of those things are starting to improve because people are figuring it out.
Yeah, and to that degree, like the longer we're in this online model, the production tools are going to get better and better and better for being not in a venue or studio operation. And the technology that we see out there right now has already made giant, you know, light years of jump just in the last, you know, 2.5 to 3 months. You know, because there's such a rush now to get their programming back on the air, whether you're actually in traditional sports or you're esports, or you're just like late night television trying to get your stuff back on the air. That the technology is just exploding right now, and it's a pretty exciting time in general to see kind of the evolution of kind of the online broadcast spaces going.
It seems like we're all kind of winding toward closing remarks here. Asaf, anything you want to add at this point?
Sure. You know, I saw a question. What security has to do with that? And the important thing for us is that we make security for people, not for security people. So I can be in many cybersecurity conference talking to cybersecurity experts, but then the people that actually needs to use and understand that there are risks there are out there, and they are not security experts, and we are building it not for the security experts. So my point is, don't think that solutions needs to be expensive or complicated or difficult. And sometimes a simple solution just to protect you from the one that are coming, especially if you're a smaller one, is just all that you need. So it sounds bad, but the hackers will go and attack the other guy that have nothing, because it's just making it more difficult for them. But more thing, what to look at, I like to look at the positive things. If somebody is hacking or restreaming your content, it means that your content is valuable, right? It means that people, there is demand for that. And for that, there is also the part of security and where it can help. The same thing that protect the streaming and the user of the customers are allowed to restream it really easily to systems that already exist around the world. So also when you want to expand to other geographies or other distribution systems, instead of saying, well, why do I have fraud, or why people restream it, just take it as an opportunity to increase your audience and to make it available to more people around the world.
Great. And Liz, anything else you want to add? Try to unmute you. Okay, sorry.
I think that it's just important to note that there is work out there to be had, and the work being that we're at least seeing come in right now with consistency besides events is that clients are asking for solutions to get their executives or their talent on platforms that we then do a call and response to get at-home participants engaged. So if it's someone like a celebrity from their basement who's doing a call to action, it does appear that people want to act. And I think that living at that intersection and helping connect all of the people, whether it's a national bank of a client or an entertainment conglomerate and the average American at home, we now live at the crux of that. And that's really powerful and privileged place to be, because we as live streamers know what those answers are. So we are now the linchpin. So for anyone who is concerned about if there will be work, I think that there is, especially for this group of folks.
Great, thank you. So just thanks to all the panelists. Really, this has been a great discussion for me to be part of, and thanks to all the attendees. Please take a look at the chat before we wrap up here, and there's some really useful links that the panelists have been helpful enough to put in the chat for us, just for things you can learn from them going forward. And I will turn it over back to Eric.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks all our panelists. And yeah, those links in the chat should be great. Ben Ratner has a Facebook group for live producers, and I think everyone's going to head over and check out Alex's office hours as soon as they get a chance. It sounds like a tremendous resource. I would once again like to thank Verimatrix for sponsoring this particular panel, and thanks to Asaf for his contributions. And thanks again to Limelight Networks for sponsoring Streaming Media East Connect all week.